We are now live on YouTube with the March 25th, 2019 meeting of the OpenJS Foundation Bootstrap team. We have 13 different panelists with us today. Thank you everyone for making time out of your day to join us. And we have a handful of different things on the agenda. So I think we can just jump right in. The first issue that we have to discuss is number 127. That is the CPC charter. Do not dictate how the Node.js board member is elected. This is a slight change to the charter, which more or less, it does kind of two different things. It makes it clear that the TSC and community committee, it establishes the name and the shorthand. We used the TSC shorthand, but it never actually said technical steering committee prior. So it just kind of clears that up. And then it also says that the representatives will be selected according to a process defined by the TSC and the ComCom, as opposed to through a vote of all members of the Node.js organization. We have not determined exactly how we want to run that election, but we wanted to kind of leave that up to Node to decide. Are there any concerns or objections to that change in text? Okay, great. Then I will go ahead and squash and merge the changes. Thank you, everyone. That has now landed. Before we move on to the next agenda item, it is worth mentioning, so now that we've adjusted all of the changes in the CPC charter, I'll go ahead and open up the change to land it as stage 3. I do believe, but I could be mistaken, that the board does need to just review it one more time since there are changes that have been made, but that should not be an issue. It would then be able to land as stage 3. I think at that point, I will go ahead and make a repo for the CPC with the README and the charter and some basic housekeeping docs in it. Does anyone object to me going ahead and kind of bootstrapping a repo for the CPC?
Nope.
Nope. Great. So I will take that as an action item to follow up on. So the next item that we have right now is number 108, which is to move expectations to stage 3. We discussed this in the last meeting. The only changes that have happened since we discussed it last were the changes that were requested from the board, which were specifically that rather than landing it in the root of the project folder, it was a copy of it is moved into the artifacts directory, and then members of our team will go through and break out each of the things within the expectation docs that has not currently landed within proposals into their own proposals. Does anyone object to landing this as stage 3 with those specific changes?
No objections.
Nope.
No. Sounds good.
Excellent. I will go ahead and land that as well. Cool. So the next one that we have on here is number 125, Collab Summit Session for CPC. This was opened by Jory. Would you like to talk about it?
Sure, yeah. So in our Collaborators Summit planning meeting, we identified that the CPC might potentially like to have a dedicated meeting time at the event, and that might include space or remote streaming needs, that kind of thing. And so we decided that the best place to ascertain that would be to bring it here to the Bootstrap meeting and find out what our expectations as an OpenJSF Bootstrap team, what expectations we would have in terms of connecting and meeting at that event so that we can plan accordingly. And that's it. So what expectations do we have?
I'm just thinking that, will people want to have it in parallel with other sessions, which they're probably also going to want to attend? Is one concern to think about. Otherwise, it did sound like we thought it was a good idea to have the kickoff meeting there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, sorry, Michael, didn't mean to interrupt you. Please finish.
No, I was.
I think that was me.
Oh, go for it.
I was just going to say, from the experience that I think at least from attending multiple collaborator summits, the feedback I've consistently seen and heard is that synchronous or like everyone in one room together isn't necessarily the most productive use of everyone's time. And I do think that there are probably people who aren't necessarily exactly interested in engaging with CPC, not CPC, or participating in it. So I do think running it synchronously is maybe not the thing we'd want to do, but going down the path of like taking up 2 slots rather than like 1 might be a better idea.
Yeah, I want to second that. Judging from how the governance sessions went last time, it was a core group of very involved people who stuck around the entire time. And possibly just taking a poll of who would be interested in attending and making sure that there's as little overlap with other sessions they're interested in as possible would be a better way to go about it.
Yeah, I was thinking that, or it could be like after the main sessions during the day or at lunch or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Supplemental session.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, I think there's 2 different ways to look at this. One where we try to make something for that core group of people, but I do think that it's worth considering in comparison to what we had the last time. While this is going to be, a big open meeting, the CPC meetings themselves are big open meetings that people can choose to come and attend or not attend. And we're going to have a much more directed and clear conversation. Well, I do understand that like sometimes these large plenary sessions are not the most effective. I think there's like really clear stuff that as a CPC and as a foundation we need to figure out. I think that personally that there's a lot of value in having a session that is booked where that's the only session that's running during that time. And, it's not like there's a lack of hallway track and other breakout spaces that people can go to. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with having that as the only curated content during that time so there isn't competing content, and allowing people who are less interested in that and making it clear, you don't need to be in here, go to the breakout rooms, go do hallway track, go parent some stuff or take, half an hour if you need to catch up on some work. I don't think that that's such a terrible idea personally.
So why not both? Miles, to back up your point, I do think that there are some things that it would be really helpful if people from the various projects are witness to and a part of, and that there also can be breakout time for the folks in the CPC who are maybe more interested in getting down in the weeds and like not necessarily collecting feedback time, but actually executing.
Yeah, like I could see like a session which is the focus is okay, the new foundation and an opportunity for people to ask questions and to cover some things. And then, but make that separate from the actual CPC meeting, which everybody could show up to if they wanted to as well. But we'll actually try and be an in-person meeting as opposed to answering questions kind of thing.
It sounds like regardless, we're going to want 2 time slots for this. Like it's going to be a long session. So
yeah, I think it's that we need to make sure for like planning of the CPC or for folks who will be in the CPC by the time the Collab Summit happens, maybe the ask would be that there should be a clear agenda and a separation of things that it's important for everyone to be a part of versus, the CPC down in the weeds stuff that can be the breakout meeting.
Yeah, the other question is, do we have a feel for how many CPC members will actually be there?
That's still a question of,
right.
who is technically on the CPC.
Exactly, yeah. Well, I know, I guess I realized that as I said that. So it's, but I think we want to have a feeling for that because like the proposal to have the first meeting be there only really makes sense if we've got enough people who are there.
Totally. We can always change that if that doesn't work, right? Yeah.
Yep.
If we determine that if we get the CPC members established and they're like, no, we don't need to do that yet.
Yeah, I think I'm just approaching it from kind of the bridging the collab as helping to organize the Collaborator Summit and helping, to bootstrap this. It's easy to give up the space if in a couple weeks we realize we don't really need it. We'll just do what we need to do in some more hallway style way than it is to decide we don't need it and then end up needing space.
Yeah.
So, as a suggestion, perhaps what we can do is maybe we frame the first bit as more of a kind of town hall style Q&A type session,
Mm-hmm.
and then a breakout session that's more about like getting into the nitty gritty and doing the work.
Yeah.
I think the only concern that I would have with the second session and things running against it, but we'll just have to figure it out with curating, is it turns out that any of the big technical things that we're working on across the projects is likely to be led by someone who probably has an interest in the CPC as well. So I think it's going to be really, really hard for us to find a time slot to get into deep CPC stuff that isn't going to be in conflict with whatever content is running against it.
Well, we'll just have to work. I mean, that we know that that's just from some of the uncomfy vibes. Like we have to accommodate somewhat for really big conversations that come up very last minute or at the session itself.
Mm-hmm.
I was almost just thinking like if we made it that session like 6 to 7 the first day.
You saying
right?
AM?
No, I meant PM.
Oh,
So sort of like after the main day.
Oh.
Yeah.
You know, so people can stick around, or if they're not interested, they can just go back and then people meet up, you know, wherever's happening after 7, right?
Perhaps we could do it as a dinner.
That's the other thing, although it's kind of hard for people to talk at a dinner, right?
Yeah, and dinners feel a little more exclusive as well. We want to make sure it's inviting.
That's true. And we also have a sponsor for a first day one evening event.
Okay, what time is that likely to be?
It's likely to be, I mean, I don't know for sure, but it's likely to be a start time of 6 or 7, you know, and go a couple hours.
Yeah, I don't think we can get like serious CPC work done at a dinner. It would have to be a very particular setup, and I don't know how many people would be able to stay focused.
Yeah, and it may not be a good idea to leave that important stuff until the end of the day when people are burnt out from having had a whole day of thinking.
It could be a lunch session.
Yeah.
Or first thing in the morning on the second day.
Mm-hmm.
What's the first thing in the morning time? Back to that 6 a.m.
I mean, I'm imagining that the actual like breakout sessions and stuff will probably start at 9:30 or 10. So we could do something at, you know, 8:30, you know, which
I think that would be fine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is for sure, let's see if we can submit a session like via the CFP style for like, hey, let's just have a town hall kind of thing, and then another session we might want to plan for in the morning or some other time, which is the tentative meeting time if there.
And the town hall would be day 1, so that we can take that to the meeting in the morning.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay. Groovy.
Okay, great. Anything else that anyone wants to bring up regarding this particular issue? Cool. Jory, are you okay with me removing the Bootstrap agenda from that issue for now?
Yeah, and just so what I'm going to take as the action here is just to fill out the form for the CFP form for a town hall, and then we can continue to coordinate via this meeting if we're going to have an actual CPC meeting.
Very cool. So the next item that we have up is issue number 121, project housekeeping, create a checklist for new projects / updating existing projects. Jory, this is also yours. Would you like to introduce it?
Sure. So obviously there's a lot to do to bring us all together under one wonderful OpenJS umbrella, and that includes a lot of tasks that the projects will have to make sure are done to make sure that they're actually in alignment with the OpenJSF policies. A lot of existing JSF projects have just different references to the JS Foundation, or that kind of thing. We identified a bunch of other things we wanted the projects to do or be part of as well through this process. So I started to create a list of like checklist type items for what projects would want to just review and make sure that they had taken care of, to make sure that they're like kind of all under, have all that housekeeping done. And I've had several folks actually, Michael and Chris Hiller have added other actions. And I'm curious if we feel like this captures all of them or if there are more. But idea here is to create this checklist and then start to think about how we can support projects in getting them done.
Great. Do you want to review some of the stuff that is on the checklist right now and see if there's any concerns with what we have out there?
Sure, yeah. So a couple of things related to our IPR. On the project level, lots of projects need to probably update their copyright notices that they may have on their websites or GitHub repositories that reference the JS Foundation. That obviously needs to be updated to the OpenJS Foundation. Similarly, we have projects that are using a CLA, and if they want to continue to use a CLA, then the CLA needs to be updated. Optionally, the JSF does provide for a DCO. I know Node also has a DCO. So this is a great time for projects to switch if they want to switch to a DCO. But anyway, they need to make that selection and then update accordingly. We have a CLA bot that we use, which is that SAP bot that's pretty popular. There's some maintenance issues related to, moving stuff over for that to the OpenJS Foundation from the JS Foundation. We have disclaimers that we have for projects that are doing crowdfunding, that those will need to be updated. There's any existing domains that need to be transferred and other infrastructure related tasks. All of those accounts are currently under JS Foundation controlled accounts, and we'll want to probably update like Cloudflare and others to be OpenJS Foundation. Obviously the Common Code of Conduct that we discussed at length in our Bootstrap process, we'll want to support projects coming on board with that and answering any questions there. Oh yeah, obviously, which of our delightful project community members want to be on the CPC? They need to pick their representative, and just other sorts of tasks like that.
As you were going through those, the one thought that came to mind is like the move the update GSF CLA bot. That's not something the projects do, is it?
No, I guess it's really not. That one would be move up. I guess that would only apply if a project was going to adopt a CLA that didn't already have that, but yeah, no, I guess not.
I guess it was more that I was thinking like, isn't that something that's run by the foundation so that
yes,
like we need the foundation. So the place I was going is I think we need another list, which is things we need to put in place for the foundation. Another example is like the adopt the Common Code of Conduct. We probably need an action that says get the Common Code of Conduct wording somewhere under the OpenJS org.
Yeah.
So that people can point to it, right?
Yeah, and I agree with you. I was just sort of thinking like, okay, what have I been dealing with in the JS Foundation, and what kinds of like things now need to be updated as a result. So you're right, those aren't really specific to a project, I guess, unless a project specifically had a question about how to change their internal policy to be in alignment with the code of conduct. But you're right, those are more of like a foundation level thing and less of a project level thing.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this seems like the kind of thing that, because it is especially tasks that just have to be broken out and like assigned, essentially, we can always close them if it's not appropriate for like a project to have to do a thing after we've determined it. But it almost does sound like we need to have some level of project management for this, just to check all the boxes and make sure stuff gets done.
Yeah.
Like, do we just like make the list and then file it as issues? And like can we be, because the project board, like, I just wonder if we can like, project manage this up.
Well, I think another idea that Michael had last time was that if we create a list now, then it also kind of becomes part of an onboarding list for future projects. Mm-hmm. Like, if a cool new Acme JS comes in, and one of the things they're going to need to do is select if they're going to use a CLA or DCO, for example.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking like, on that one, it's like, I'm thinking that we need in 115 something that says, okay, what are we going to do on the foundation CPC side to make sure we're ready for projects going through the checklist?
Right.
And one of them is like, we need to be doing something on the GSF CLA bot. I don't know what it is, so I'm not sure what it is, but I'm just, my comment really is maybe we need to either duplicate some of this, like that one, into the other list, or move it, one of the two. I'm not sure.
Some of this stuff too, though, I was wondering, like, not to completely derail this, but like there's stuff that we can do now, and then there's also stuff that I think is somewhat the responsibility of the CPC. And I just wonder, like, is there like a list of things that we can tag as that the CPC could tackle as soon as it's formed, versus like some of this bare minimum stuff to get the CPC up?
Well, I think one of the big things that the CPC should tackle as soon as it's formed and ready is sort of the overall management of the foundation's infrastructure, because one challenge that we have on the JS have had past tense and continue to have, I suppose, the JS Foundation side was the fact that a lot of our infrastructure has just been sort of moved. It's a kind of a cobbled together of old jQuery Foundation stuff, old Dojo Foundation stuff, like, and this smash of other things. And so I think we have an opportunity to rethink how we manage the foundation's infrastructure and support. And that would be something squarely in the domain of the CPC, in my opinion.
So I typed into, like, in the other list, is that, like, we had bootstrapping and post bootstrap. So I kind of thought I'd put that under post bootstrap. Does that make sense?
That makes sense, yeah.
Okay. So I just added that over there. And the JSF CLA bot, is that something you think we should be working on now? Like, is it we have a new org, we need to do something, or is it?
I think that can go in the post as well, and maybe even can be considered as part of like infrastructure.
Okay.
But I just, as one of the few people with knowledge of that thing and how it works, I just want to make sure that like you guys, that people know about it in case I get hit by a bus.
Yep. Okay.
So I want to loop back to documenting well this onboarding process for projects. Like, is this an artifact? I'm assuming it's an artifact that has to live somewhere in Bootstrap, and it's a checklist for new project onboarding. We have a chicken and egg problem with projects coming in and the checklist that they need to do to accommodate the new foundation. How do we want to tackle that?
Just to be clear, are you talking about like projects that aren't currently in the foundation that want to join, or alternatively projects that we currently have that are trying to establish themselves?
I would say both. Like there's a checklist for, like, you're a product in the foundation here. Like, we have a ticket open on the node side for this, but that's going to be a pretty well-defined checklist for current projects for this one-time move into the new foundation, as well as new ones showing up. And Michael, you mentioned we can kind of consolidate some work there and have this nice onboarding artifact at the end of it.
Yeah, I think we
where should we be capturing that?
Yeah, probably under the OpenJS Foundation, or we want a PR which lands this somewhere. I guess, Miles, I haven't looked, we probably need, well, not need, but one of the approaches would be to follow the similar approach that we had in the Bootstrap with the proposals and so forth. and the different stages. So we could we've captured some initial thoughts here. Probably the next step is to write that into a proposal for the checklist at stage 0, and then we can sort of iterate it on that from there.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we even have some of the implementation of it, it could come in as stage 1. I think that that's a really great idea to get started, and we can, perhaps what we can do is frame it as an onboarding document, and we can just have current projects go through this process to just kind of dog food it and make sure that it's something that's reasonable for new projects as well.
Yep.
I can take on drafting that proposal and PRing it in the next day or so.
That's great. I think this should probably be proposals, but not under Bootstrap, right?
I mean, I think until this, like my personal assumption of this, and people can please chime in if you disagree, is that I think that we will continue being a Bootstrap team up until the point that the CPC itself forms. And then I would imagine that the process that we've designed would just kind of get handed over to the CPC, and it would now be CPC meetings instead of Bootstrap meetings, and it would more or less serve the same purpose.
Yeah.
Crazy idea. Can we just rename the repo after the first CPC meeting?
Yeah, we can just do that.
Sure. Okay, no, that makes sense. So just the same place. I was thinking it was a little different, but I think I agree with you. We should just keep doing the same thing until the CPC actually forms.
Yeah, and then the CPC can decide what they want to do, which is also us anyways, probably. So, we'll
the people, yeah, exactly. The people involved can say, okay, yes, we're now going to basically ratify all these proposals and do whatever or not. So,
yeah.
Yep. Okay. Let's keep it as simple as we can.
Cool. So, I think that's a really nice leadway into our final topic for the day, which is number 115, steps to bootstrap the CPC.
Yep. So I have edited it a little bit while we were talking to add a couple of items. Do you want me to?
Yeah, if you could introduce this and walk through it, that'd be great.
Okay, so this is basically just to build out a checklist of things we need to do to bootstrap. So far, we've got the new GitHub organization. We've updated the governance docs to reflect the name selected for the foundation. Next on the list is confirm the list of initial impact projects. I had an action to reach out to the Express project. I did try, but didn't have success. So I actually got Doug's email from Todd just a couple hours ago, and I've sent him an email, so I'll follow up on that. My thinking is we need a document somewhere that says what those are. Again, I don't know if that fits in proposals or somewhere, that something that just says, the initial projects are X and here's the categories they're in. And maybe that's a document that's living anyway. Like, we probably need somewhere under the OpenJS org, here's all the projects and here's what stages they're at forever. So maybe we just create the first cut at that.
Should that be a projects repo?
That would make sense to me.
So say that, what would be in this repo exactly?
I think it would be like I could see like a matrix that shows here's the names of the projects, and are the impact, growth, and or whatever, right?
Yeah, I mean, doesn't that just sound like an artifact within the CPC repo? Wouldn't that just be like a markdown file, like potentially even in the main README?
It could just be called projects.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any, if there was a reason to have like other things related to projects or a space for projects, then maybe a subdirectory would make sense. But otherwise,
yeah, you'd kind of like to have it stand out so anybody coming in sees it very rapidly.
Tierney, was there a particular reason why you were thinking its own repo?
Mostly for maintainability and like one, separating the maintenance of that list and that the actual document itself or whatever content lives there as like its own standalone thing, so people can come and see that and like if that's the specific information they're looking for, they can just find that easily. Additionally, it would allow contribution to that to be independent of CPC. So like, for example, if we built it without like you know, something I go look for Node often is like all of the logo assets. So, you know, if someone wanted to come and PR, you know, here's all the links to the various brand assets for each of these projects, they could do that in that repo and not have to have that go through the CPC. It was more just like a separation of concerns around, you know, being able to kind of recognize and maintain that over time.
Mm-hmm. I would like to push back just slightly that, like, since the CPC maintains the project list, it to me sounds reasonable for that to live within the CPC repo. But I do think you identified something such as like assets that could maybe be its own repo. Does that maybe sound like a reasonable kind of split of that? Or are you still like thinking that this list should be its own project?
So, I mean, you know, I definitely think that we should probably have I was thinking of something that was a little bit more fleshed out than just like a bulleted list of all of the projects, but like basically a tabular format in, you know, a README of all of the things. So project name, you know, trademark associated, branding, stuff like that. That could be a bigger effort or a bigger piece of content that lives outside of the main repo, and then still have that in the main repo, the CPC repo rather, sorry.
Yeah, I'm still not convinced that this needs to live in two spaces personally though.
So,
okay.
So
Jordy, you were going to say something?
Yeah, can I just weigh in, because Tierney, I think you're starting to convince me a little bit of this approach for one key reason. One is that we have gotten over the years a number of people request you know, information, or they may have a request to use a logo or a mark for you know, to print a sticker or print a t-shirt or that kind of thing. And there's something to be said for having a repository that is a brand guide, if you will, for our projects, and that advises the public on the proper ways to use the marks, and to use, and you know, and whom to contact for, you know, press questions and things like that. So that may be a little bit, that information may get buried in a CPC process repository, but it's also not like a need that we have immediately. So.
Right, I could see there being a separate repo for marketing and stuff. I guess, Tierney, I thought you were suggesting a separate directory, not a separate repo originally.
No, I was suggesting a repo.
Ah, okay.
But I think, in like to Droy's point, Tierney, I think that you've identified something that makes a lot of sense, which is particularly like branding and asset management. Like I would say the primary concern that I would have is, since the CPC is chartered with maintaining which projects are part of the foundation, that to me it would make sense that like that should be within the main repo from a discoverability standpoint. But I think the second that we start getting into things that are in themselves their own initiatives, that makes a ton of sense to be in its own repo, such as branding and marketing. Perhaps the code of conduct ends up in its own thing, and perhaps even the project. So maybe it makes sense for us to start with it in a CPC repo and break out things as they appear to be, you know, creating more noise than they should. Does that seem reasonable to you, Tony?
Yeah, that's totally fair.
Okay, so the consensus now sounds like basically we'll create a PR that has the initial matrix in the, are we going to put that in still in the Bootstrap repo then?
I guess like that's the question, is like overall, when the Bootstrap is done and the CPC starts, do we want to have like, do we want to archive this Bootstrap repo for the sake of like historical purposes and start fresh? Or do we want to just transition this into the CPC repo? I think both are possible. One of the things I guess keep in mind is right now, because we transitioned it from Node.js Bootstrap to the Bootstrap repo here, all of the old links that exist, including in old press releases and stuff, will all still be alive. Yep. If we rename this repo, and this is something we've dealt with before that was frustrating, but if we rename this repo, we will lose all of those redirects. Okay. So we might be better off like more or less sunsetting this repo and moving the work into the CPC repo, but it more or less being like a transition. So it's like more or less a clone of the same repo with a different name.
Will we lose the redirects on a rename? The website prototype, which got renamed to node.js.dev, currently still redirects even after a rename.
So the way in which GitHub works, and we had this happen with the LTS and release repo, is when you rename something, it keeps the redirect. When you move it between orgs, it keeps the redirect. But I'm not 100% sure. We could just do a test to make sure. Because we transferred this repo between orgs, there is the redirect. But if we now in turn then rename it, we may lose that first redirect when it creates the new redirect.
Interesting. Go talk to a GitHub engineer.
Yeah, I can quickly run a proof of concept and see what happens.
Yeah, one other in defense of renaming, if we create a new repo, we're going to lose all the watchers and the people who started the repo and the current forks. So just keeping folks in the loop, not making them resubscribe to something new, may also be worth just the rename.
Yeah. It's 65 people right now, though, so it's not like a huge amount.
Not a huge audience. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the main thing for me would be just like leaving Bootstrap as like, here's historically what happened, and then the CPC is like a new stuff that's moved over, or just doing the rename, which people think is best on that front.
I mean, maybe it would be best for us to just keep working in the Bootstrap repo. Kind of like maybe we don't even make the CPC repo yet. We just keep working in the Bootstrap repo under the assumption that this repo will become the new repo, because we easily can make a new repository in GitHub and push the exact same source code to it. So without it having to be a GitHub fork or a GitHub rename, the thing that we could then have would be we would archive Bootstrap. It would then have all the issues and pull requests and history in there, and a new repo that could have the Git history of all of our work, but actually be a fresh space. But perhaps we should, like, without thinking too much about the future, we can just work in this repo, assuming that this is the repo that it will be, and then just kind of iterate when we get to the point that we're ready to flip the switch.
It's also likely that there's a lot of content that the CPC proper, as they flesh out programs, will want to spin out, much like the projects directory. Like projects could be for maintaining a list of projects, also static assets, also holding documentation on what it takes to become a project or work your way up through the project graduation. Like at that point, there'll be enough content to warrant a separate repo, probably. But again, that's a problem for future maintainers.
Okay, so
like
it sounds like
we just use it as a big dumping ground.
So it sounds like we just create a new file called projects.md in the Bootstrap repo with the initial list. That's the way to go. Any objections to that? Jory, would it be possible for me to volunteer you to do the PR for that first version, since I think you have the list of the biggest list of projects and stages?
Sure, yeah, I that's not a problem.
Okay, thanks.
So a quick question to everyone, or before I kind of do this, is there anything else that people wanted to dig in on issue 115?
Yeah, I was just going to move on to the next things after that one.
Okay, cool. Let's do that, and then I'll bring up my derailing comment afterwards.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just reopening 115 because I added the common code of conduct in the OpenJS Foundation org, so I'll take the action to create a PR to do that. We need a new Zoom YouTube. So Brian, I think you had the action to pursue that. Do you have an update?
I don't have an update this week. I'm sorry.
Okay. We've talked about the target for initial CPC meeting, and we've already talked about the checklist for projects. So that's everything that's currently on that list. And so unless there's something else people want to add in or discuss, that's probably good for this week.
So I have one thing that I didn't have time to create any kind of document to guide discussion, but this is related to helping potential new projects on board and kind of follow along, because we do have a number of projects that are on the edges and they're interested in coming in, which is very exciting. Obviously, we can't vote to accept those projects until we have a CPC that can review and take the vote. And so the question is, what can we be doing to help them get prepared for that process? We have some things that we want them to draft up kind of to prepare their charters, but is there anything else process-wise we can be doing to make sure that we're keeping track of them and that we're helping them get excited and stay excited about coming to the OpenJS Foundation?
I would like to expand on what Jory was saying a little bit, because this is actually exactly what I was hoping to bring up. So thank you, Jory, for breaking the ice on that. We're gonna, I've already talked to some people who are interested in joining on their projects that are quite exciting. And, I think that there's something to be said that some of these projects may even be impact level projects. How do we go about kind of keeping that line warm and keeping those projects involved? But even further, because of how open we've made the CPC, there's a very high probability that a number of people from those projects are people who would be eligible to participate in these meetings. And, we're so early in the formation of our groups and how we want to do things. It seems to me, and if other people disagree, I could totally see why, but it seems to me like it may be short-sighted to not be bringing them into the fold early on, not necessarily saying, hey, you're officially in the foundation, but if they want to come to the table and do work and help us bootstrap this, it seems like, there's a bit of a chicken and egg thing there, but we'd be doing ourselves a disadvantage by A, not including people who have bandwidth and time to help do this work, and B, by not including projects that want to join the foundation. So, I don't have an answer to this. We're only 11 people out of a large group of people, but is there a way in which we can kind of get these projects involved sooner? And, Jory, I think you were hinting at that, but I'll be more explicit, is do we really need to wait until the CPC bootstraps in order to start getting these projects engaged and start talking about what it would mean for them to join?
So I would say, sorry.
Go for it, Michael.
I was going to say, I think two things. One, the checklist is something we can already start to share. And two, these meetings are open. So if we've got people from projects who would like to get involved, let's get them, make sure they know they should be showing up.
Yeah, I was going to echo that. More the merrier. I mean, these are open meetings and we want that engagement 100%. Just because the process for official intake isn't there yet doesn't mean they can't be a part of shaping it.
Mm-hmm. So just to be very clear, if there are members who are leadership of those projects who are not active in any current OpenJS Foundation projects, are we being explicit? Are we explicitly saying here that we're okay with them showing up to the meeting, even though they're technically not part of the group that's invited?
Yeah, I guess I was forgetting. Did we say that the invitee list for these were people who are part of one of the existing projects? Is that?
That is at least what my impression has been of the general invite list for the Bootstrap meetings, as well as what we had for the most part. That was my understanding of how the CPC was chartered. The meetings are open, but to members of projects or contributors to projects within the foundation as it is.
Right, I meant the Bootstrap committee, actually.
The Bootstrap committee has been open to only those groups, but we can extend that. I mean, perhaps what we could do, and this could be something that we follow up with on next week or identify something more explicitly, is that maybe we have a process of projects being able to publicly open a pull request to open their intent to join. And if you are part of that list of projects intending to join the foundation, that members of your project can participate in the group.
That would sound great to me.
Mm-hmm.
Jory, is that something that maybe you could reflect in the project list that you open?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I just think as long as we're making it clear that, because I know there'll be some projects that would be super excited to be part of like building this, and then there are going to be others that are looking for something that's more, you know, complete. And so as long as it's clear that if they want to join, they don't have to get involved, but we'd love for them to get involved. You know, I think you know, that works.
And I guess the flip side of it too, and then this is something for us to decide as a group, I guess twofold. One would be, we need to make it really clear to projects that given like maybe it's intent to join or something like that, like some sort of status that's a different status, that there's no guarantee that they can join without us having consensus in the group would be the first one there. And I mean, that's not the nicest thing to say, but I think we need to like set that expectation that there is no guarantees until it's done. And I think the second would be to what degree we enable them to participate in consensus seeking. And so it seems to me reasonable that they would not, like they could observe and participate in the meetings, but would not be in a position to participate in the consensus seeking itself. So they wouldn't be able to object to things that we're doing, but they would be able to voice concerns, if that makes sense. But I think that like getting into that may even be just kind of pedantic, because in general in this group, I think we've done a really good job of, you know, trying to make sure that we move forward things that makes everyone comfortable. But the flip side of that is like, it may be weird if like a lone objector to someone is like a project that's not yet in the foundation.
The other thing that I want to just talk out loud about really quick is just how we want to handle projects that maybe not ready to be publicly stating that they intend to join. You know, I'm just curious if that's something that we feel like is a case we need to consider, or not now.
I guess my question is would those people be comfortable showing up and participating even if they're not comfortable stating an interest or an intent?
Probably not. I would imagine no. But
perhaps
it kind of is a hint. It's like a hint if you start to show up from a project as well. So
I mean, perhaps we split the difference on that. And like with the TSC, for example, when we need to, we do private sections at the end to discuss things that are confidential or have, you know, potential concerns. And maybe we just take that one step at a time. And if a project, like, let's try to get this in place so that projects can express their intent. And maybe it is even something we should add to the CPC charter as like another class of project. That's just like projects intending to join, and we help develop the process for doing that. And I could imagine it's not only now, but in the future, there may be projects that want to join, but they don't want to necessarily make it public. And we can discuss that in a private section for 5 or 10 minutes at the end of the meeting. And just on a case-by-case basis there, kind of reach consensus, or probably better is the first time it comes up, reach consensus on how we want to handle it for that one group, codify that, and then, you know, that's the process until we have a reason to change it.
Yeah, and just to make note, we have a model to base this off of in both TSC and ComCom. There's a notion of observer status, which we might just be able to lift.
Right, and I'd have to look at the CPC charter. I mean, there's requirements for regular members to be part of the projects. I'd have to look at what it said for the other ones.
I am under the impression that observers were needed to be members of the projects because they participate in consensus seeking.
Right. Okay.
So, I mean, it could be a reason for changing observers to not participate in consensus seeking and make that a requirement of being a regular member. But at least to me, that would kind of go against some of the ideals that we had in designing.
Sure. Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. Like, no. But I take your point as well that this is probably not just a current point in time. Like, you know, projects who are considering joining, they may actually want to be able to come in and participate in the CPC to some extent, just as a way to understand what's going on. And so, like you said, having, you know, a group which is like, you know, interested in joining, intent to join or whatever, that then can participate to some extent does make sense, even in the long term.
Yeah, and to me, what's kind of seeming like it would make sense right now is like another, in the project progression, having another class of projects, which is like intent to join or something like that. And members of those projects can come to the meetings as like invited. They're invited to attend the CPC meetings, but they aren't like have the same status as other people. And we could work into that, the ability for kind of, you know, the identity of those projects and that status to be kept confidential under the request of those joining. Because I could really see how in a bunch of cases, you know, especially if a project is unsure that they're going to be allowed to join, they may not want to have that be a whole big public thing until their membership is decided upon, which I think would be an interesting challenge for us to figure out as a TPC who wants to do things transparently.
Yeah, it's like, can you apply in secret or not?
And it might just be one of those good things that we can document and take kind of one step at a time as projects come in and request that. I think the other thing too is just like, and this may require the CPC to the point of like not adding people until, is like, how many projects do we really want to have in the foundation, and will it make sense for every project to join? That's going to be a hard question to answer.
Okay, but I guess in the short term, it's like, do we have consensus on saying that, you know, projects who are interested in joining could send somebody? And I think, you know, it makes sense to me, at least the starting point of what you outlined, Miles, where they can join, but not necessarily participate in the final consensus seeking if there's a, you know, if there isn't consensus, basically.
Yeah. And that seems like it would be an update to the CPC charter, an update to the progress progression proposal, as well as likely an update to the project list that Jory is putting together right now.
Yeah.
Cool.
So CPC charter, I can take the action to do that, although it won't be till next week.
Yeah, I think it would most likely make sense. Like Jory, I think for your project list, I don't think that even needs to be a proposal. That's just kind of like documentation, but maybe we make a new proposal specifically around this, which includes the updates to multiple docs. And we'll just, I can take the action item on putting something like that together and just kind of thinking through, because in the past, all of our proposals were creating new assets, not augmenting existing assets. So I'll take some time and think through what a proposal that does that might look like.
Okay. So basically Miles will take action to put proposal on how to include projects as the first step. Yeah, I think the project list, like, I don't think that needs to be a proposal. I think it's just like a PR that says projects.md, here's the content, right? And because that'll be continuously updated as projects join or well, hopefully as they join and move through the different stages.
Okay, cool. We have 2 minutes left. Does anyone have any other thoughts or concerns or, you know, things that we can completely resolve in less than 2 minutes of time? No? Okay. Surprised. Just kidding. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining today. See you all bright and early next Monday. Something that has been brought up, and maybe we can, if someone wants to open an issue about it or add it to the agenda, discussion around the current times and whether or not those still work for people, and if we want to consider reevaluating the times.
I'd recommend we open an issue that we can tag with the agenda to make sure we review it next time. Does that make sense?
Yep. Great. I'm going to go ahead and stop. Oh, wait, Michael, you were going to say?
I was going to say I'll create the issue unless somebody else wants to volunteer.
Okay, cool. Michael, looks like you volunteered. I'm going to go ahead and stop the stream now.